All right, let's jump right into a story that is, and I mean this, totally unique in American history. We're talking about a man who landed the two most powerful jobs in the entire country, but whose legacies in those jobs, well, they couldn't be more different. This is the incredible story of William Howard Taft. So let me just start by asking you a question. I mean, think about it for a second. The presidency, right? The massive power of the executive branch. And then the role of Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the final authority on American law. Only one person in all of U.S. history has ever held both of those titles, and that man was William Howard Taft. And this right here is the central puzzle of his entire career. As president, he was kind of reluctant. His term was rocky, and his legacy is often just overlooked. But as Chief Justice, whoa, he was an absolute powerhouse who not only fulfilled his lifelong dream, but basically reshaped the Supreme Court into the institution we know today. So how does that even happen? Well, let's get into it. We're going to start in the White House because Taft's presidential record is packed with surprises, especially when you look at one of the biggest issues of the day, taking on those giant corporate monopolies, the trusts. First, though, a little context on his style. Taft's foreign policy got a nickname: dollar diplomacy. The whole idea was to use America's financial muscle to get what it wanted abroad. This tells you everything about his mindset. He was methodical, he was structured, he liked using established systems. And that same, almost lawyerly approach is exactly how he handled business at home. Now, if I ask you to name the great trustbuster president, that larger-than-life character who famously took on big business, I bet you're thinking of his mentor, the one and only Theodore Roosevelt, right? Of course, that's the story we all know. But the actual facts, they tell a very, very different story. The key to unlocking this whole thing is a single number, 99. That's how many antitrust lawsuits, cases against monopolies, the Taft administration launched. So what's the big deal about the number 99? Get this. In just one 4-year term, Taft's team filed 99 of these suits. That is more than Theodore Roosevelt's administration did in 7.5 years. So why don't we hear about it? Well, Roosevelt was a politician. He went after what he called bad trusts for maximum political effect. Taft, on the other hand, was a former judge. To him, the Sherman Antitrust Act was the law, period, and he was going to apply it to any trust that broke it. And boy, did he get results. His administration won massive, landmark cases in 1911 that blew up two of the biggest monopolies on the planet, Standard Oil and the American Tobacco Company. These cases also created something called the rule of reason, a new legal standard that, believe it or not, was about to set the stage for a huge constitutional battle. Because while Taft was busy using the courts to enforce the law, a much bigger, much more fundamental fight was brewing about the courts themselves. The country was basically tearing itself apart over one question: who really gets to say what the Constitution means? You could just feel the frustration building at this time. All across the country, progressives felt like the courts were just a roadblock to any kind of reform. I mean, the judiciary had killed a federal income tax. They'd blocked laws that tried to limit how long people could be forced to work. To a lot of Americans, the courts just looked like they were protecting big business at the expense of everybody else. And the whole fiery debate really boiled down to this one big concept: judicial supremacy. It's the idea that, at the end of the day, the Supreme Court gets the final say on what the Constitution means. For a long, long time, nobody really questioned this. But now, in the middle of the progressive era, it was suddenly at the very center of a national crisis. This was the question on everybody's lips. When the people, acting through their elected officials, pass a law, can a small group of unelected judges just say no? Who's really in charge here? The judges or the citizens? This single question would come to define the next presidential election. Which brings us to the absolutely wild presidential election of 1912. Seriously, this thing wasn't just a political contest. It was a 4-way brawl for the very soul of the American Constitution. Just look at this lineup of ideas. You had the incumbent, Taft, the Republican, basically defending the status quo. An independent judiciary has the last word. Then you had his old boss, Teddy Roosevelt, running as a progressive, who argued that people should be able to vote to literally recall judges and even overturn their decisions. The Democrat, Woodrow Wilson, wanted to beef up the power of the president. And the socialist, Eugene Debs, he wanted to just scrap the whole thing and write a new constitution. So what happened? Well, the Republican Party split its vote between Taft and Roosevelt, which basically just handed the election to Woodrow Wilson. But the real winner? It wasn't a person, it was an idea. And here's the most fascinating twist in this whole story. Taft got absolutely crushed in the election. He came in third, but his core belief, that principle of judicial supremacy, it had faced its single greatest challenge, and it survived. The radical idea of letting people vote on court decisions was defeated. The courts would keep their power as the final interpreters of the Constitution. And for Taft, this political smackdown was, weirdly enough, a kind of liberation. It put him on the path to his true calling, the place where he would leave his biggest mark on America. And it wasn't the White House. It was the center seat of the Supreme Court. In 1921, his lifelong dream came true, and he was appointed Chief Justice.
And as Chief Justice, Taft didn't just interpret the law. He became an architect of the institution itself. He pushed for something called the Judges' Bill of 1925, which was a total game changer. It gave the court the power to pick and choose which cases it would hear. This turned the court from just the last court of appeal into the powerful constitutional decider we think of today, an institution that sets its own agenda. And he wasn't done. He lobbied like crazy for the construction of that grand, majestic Supreme Court building, a powerful symbol giving the court its own home, separate from Congress, a truly co-equal branch of government.
This quote, from a man who would later become Chief Justice himself, Charles Evans Hughes, just perfectly sums up the principle that Taft fought for and then built into the very foundation of American government. The idea that the ultimate meaning of our founding document, well, it lives with 9 unelected justices. Taft's vision had won completely. So Taft got the powerful, independent judiciary he always believed in. But it leaves us with a huge question, one that is maybe more relevant today than ever. In winning that fight, did he help create a system where the political battles over who gets to be a judge end up mattering more than the democratic debates among the people themselves? It's a question we are still grappling with today.